If it was.
Sure. Anybody?
Good.
Good. Go for it.
All right. First of all, I apologize for as confusing as the story is about to be. Yeah. This evening at around 9:22 p.m., one of our off-duty officers, who's a 13-year veteran, Michael Price, is arriving to his apartment complex over here on Jacksonville's south side on Cruz Road. As he pulls into his apartment complex, he sees a vehicle that's backed into a handicap spot. Draws his attention. The car is backed in, running, occupied. He's lived there for quite some time and doesn't recognize the car. It draws his attention to the car. So as he's sitting there watching the car, he's in his personal vehicle, off duty, watching what's going on. He sees one of the occupants from the car get out of the car and go to the trunk. Gets a bag out of the trunk. Then he takes a mask and puts a ski mask on over his hood. As he's watching this transpire, now proximity-wise, where he lives on Cruz Road, that backs up to the Virginia Technical College here at Beecham University. It's divided from Cruz Road by about a 6-foot concrete wall. So he's watching this activity, watching this subject put this mask on. That's a clue to us policemen that something's about to happen. He feels like a robbery is about to go down somewhere in the business that's behind the wall. So he sees the subject climb that wall and go into the business area. He goes into his apartment, he gets his bulletproof vest and his police radio, and comes back out. He begins to get on the police radio and give the description of the car that's in the parking lot and the subject who just jumped the wall, kind of telling what he believes is about to happen. I could go into this more, but we've had a little bit of a series of business robberies that occur around closing hours to some of these Asian restaurants that are over here and some of the other restaurants at around that 9, 10 o'clock hour. So this fits the pattern of what he feels like is going on. So he's putting this information out. Well, around 5 minutes later, about 9:27, the business to Jimmy John's at 5960 Beach Boulevard is actually robbed. That information is put out to the officers as well. So you've got the officers on his radio and the officer, or the HQ, the dispatcher, putting the information out about the robbery that was just going on. So several things begin to start happening at around the same time. So as I go through the series of these things, some of these things, as I tell, will be happening simultaneously. The first thing that happens is one of the first officers who arrives sees a subject fleeing the Jimmy John's restaurant. He's wearing a mask, carrying a red or a pink backpack. He starts fleeing towards the back of the Jimmy John's. That officer, who's still in his car, is shouting out the window for the subject to stop. Believes, again, the dispatch call had gone in with a robbery. He had heard the other officer come up. The subject is hopping the fence. That subject sees the officer, doesn't stop as he's given repeated instructions to do, changes direction and runs towards the front of Jimmy John's. The officer chases him. The subject is on foot. The officer's in his car, runs around the front of the business, runs around the side of the business. That officer sees that subject scale that 6-foot wall back onto Cruz Road. Again, at that same time, we have another officer who's a 9-year veteran, Officer David Couch. He pulls down Cruz Road, following the directions of the officer, Officer Price. Sees the vehicle that Officer Price had seen in the handicap spot pull out of the apartment complex. He and another officer who had just arrived do a traffic stop on that car. That car is occupied by 2 individuals. That's a short ways down Cruz from where Officer Price was located. So as, again, this is all happening right around the same time, as Officer Cruz is doing the traffic, or Officer Couch is doing the traffic stop, that subject has now come over that wall. Throws the bag over the wall, he jumps over the wall. Officer Price gives loud verbal instructions for that subject to stop. It's the same person he had seen go over the wall before, in the same spot that he had seen him go over, he's now come back. That subject refuses to comply with the directions shouted repeatedly by Officer Price. That subject has got his hands towards his waist and does not take his hands from around where his waist was. Officer Price had heard that the robbery had occurred at the Jimmy John's, so he knew a robbery had just occurred. Fearing for the safety of himself, because the subject wouldn't show him his hands, and the safety of the community in general, that a robbery and a violent felony had just occurred, Officer Price discharges his issued handgun at that subject 4 times. All that commotion is heard by Officer Couch, who again is a short ways down Cruz Road. He turns around, and comes back to assist with Officer Price. He's seeing the same thing. He discharges his issued rifle 7 or 8 times, and still looking into that to see how many times it was fired at that subject. The subject was hit at least 2 times in the lower extremities, 1 time in the leg and 1 time in the ankle. Now, I got to tell you that Officer Couch is a registered nurse. He, seeing that the subject is bleeding profusely from his gunshot wound, goes back to his car and gets her issued tourniquet. He, again, registered nurse, provides first aid by putting the tourniquet on that subject and stopping the bleeding. Fire rescue is called, he's transported to UFL and has